This is the BBC.
Here's Will Self with A Point of View.
Bring back national service. No, really, bring it back now. Yes, I know, this is the sort of rhodomontade you'd expect from a crusty old colonel in his Surrey fastness, rather than a juvenescent urban chatterer such as myself. But believe me, I mean it. I want not just cohorts of 18-year-olds square-bashing, but an entire citizen army comprising every able adult in the country. So if the need arises to defend our sceptred isle, the invaders will be faced by some 30 million trained men and women. Obviously, with such a vast force at our disposal, the need for a standing army simply evaporates, which is a large part of my motivation. On the general principle of standing armies, I take my lead from no less an authority than Immanuel Kant. Remember him? He's not just some dead German philosopher. He's the thinker who came up with the concept of the categorical imperative, which some might argue underpins almost all of our contemporary conception of private morality and public ethics. In Kant's view, for a nation-state to maintain a standing army is for it ipso facto to threaten other nations with war. After all, why have an army if you aren't prepared to use it? For Kant, permanently standing armies necessarily entail arms races, and the cost of maintaining peace by such means may soon become prohibitive, in which case having just a little bitty war may seem quite appealing. This is Kant's practical objection to standing armies. His moral objection is that paying men to kill or be killed implies they are mere tools of the state rather than human beings, with all the hideous implications that such a status entails. Lest you consider any of this recondite, you can easily apply Kant's ethical rubric to all of the disputes over the deployments, actual or possible, of our own armed services since the attacks on the Twin Towers in September 2001, or indeed to the renewal of Britain's nuclear deterrent, which is surely a perfect example of what he termed the costs related to maintaining peace. When I studied French politics at university, much emphasis was placed on the so-called army-nation concept. The general contention was that during the interwar period, the French nation having undergone so many regime changes, the state lacked legitimacy, so looked to the standing army, that relic of Napoleon's Grande Armée, to supply some. In line with this, the French army came to view itself as a synecdoche of the French nation, a part of it that yet represented the whole, and by extension as the whole of France playing a very martial and loyal part. Of course, since the Wehrmacht outflanked the Maginot Line in the late spring of 1940, we haven't heard a great deal about the French army-nation concept. This could be related to the fact that national service wasn't finally abandoned in France until the late 1990s, but I think catastrophic defeat is the more likely explanation. The British Army hasn't had to deal with the D word for some time now, preferring in respect of operations in Helmand and southern Iraq to speak of tactical withdrawal. Our armed forces have always seemed a more viable source of constitutional legitimacy than most. There are still extant regiments which were raised during the Civil War, and even before that. For at least 400 years, army and state have reinforced one another, the armed forces maintaining the state's monopoly on the exercise of violence, and the state honouring the army with honour itself, if by honour is understood a personal or collective moral code which is perceived as having greater integrity than that of the ordinary person. We see this honour bestowed on our armed forces personnel all the time, in the form of tributes to their valour and sacrifice, which might, given more conscripts were lost in 5 minutes of the Somme than professionals during the 14 years of the Afghanistan deployment, seem rather exaggerated and sentimental. In recent years, the Remembrance Day silence has been amplified, becoming a deafening howl which shouts down the entire nation's dishonourable inclination to forget such inconvenient facts. The Queen, in her 90th year, remains Commander-in-Chief of both the New Zealand Defence Force and the Canadian Armed Forces, although she stepped down as Lord High Admiral of the British Fleet in 2011. Her sons and daughter have held various military ranks over the years, while her grandson Harry actually did his bit in Helmand and was forthright about his lethal activities as the pilot of one of the British Army's most sophisticated attack helicopters. If there's people doing bad stuff to our guys, then we'll take them out of the game, I suppose. The I suppose here being, I suppose, no moral qualifier, but merely phatic. The involvement of our own head of state's grandson in the profession of state-mandated violence is, I'd argue, a key reinforcer of the British Army nation concept, just as the royal family play the part of the ordinary British family, writ very large and gilded, so their sacrifice of their own offspring impresses on us subjects the organic character of our immemorial social relations. And returning to Kant, there is, of course, an economic component to the British Army nation concept. As one of the world's leading high-tech arms manufacturers, our standing army is by way of being some 50,000 well-trained showroom demonstrators, most of whose kit and materiel is available either pret-a-porter or bespoke. Moreover, we're prepared to provide our clients, especially if they happen to be from the Gulf states, with extensive after-sales service. Conspiracy theorists often maintain the world is being kept in a constant state of war by a malevolent alliance of politicians, the military, and arms manufacturers. But I've no truck with them, only considerable time for Immanuel Kant. Because it's confusing, isn't it? After all, we're also constantly being reminded that this is a democracy, one indeed which we should take back control of. But in the arena of national defence, the role of the citizen is relegated to that of a guilty bystander, his fate in the hands of the state's hirelings, most of who have been, are, and will forever be teenage refugees from the dole queue. Enough. The creation of a citizen army would truly reinvigorate British democracy. Once we all have to undertake several weeks of hard physical training every year, we'll be match fit when it comes to the business of politics, while professional politicians will think twice before flouting the promises they've made to the vast and warlike band formerly known as the electorate. There'll be no more lions being led by donkeys when we're all leonine. Lest you think my scheme fanciful, we have right to hand 2 examples of nation-states who have citizen armies, and I think the different ways these societies approach the business of national defence will light our way to an irenic and egalitarian future. Switzerland and Israel both have citizen armies, and both countries have vigorously self-aware democracies. Personally, I'd rather be yodeling with Heidi atop a mountain of Toblerone than facing, along with the Israeli Defence Force, an imminent threat of war on all fronts, plus a constant risk of domestic terrorist attack. In Switzerland's case, defence is no mere euphemism when it comes to their citizen militia. As a proclaimed neutral state, Switzerland really does only require a defensive army. And, as every conflict since Vietnam, including the debacles our own standing army has been involved in, has amply proved, modern high-tech armies do remarkably badly against such embedded forces. Neutrality may well stick in the martial craw of us Britons. So accustomed are we to punching both below and well above our weight on the international stage. But saving the planet may be beyond our remit in a 21st century increasingly characterized by febrility, both political and ecological. No. Let's hunker down on our white cliffs, at last cut off from the main, and armed to our fluoridated teeth, issue this noble and distinctively British challenge to our adversaries. Come on and have a go, if you think you're hard enough.
That was A Point of View, written and presented by Will Self.